how can you tell a true prophet from a false one? I mean, it's a critical question, right? And the good news is, the Bible doesn't just leave you to guess. It actually gives us a surprisingly precise, almost legal standard to follow.
So what is that standard? If a prophet showed up today, what's the actual biblical test we're supposed to use? Well, the Hebrew Scriptures lay out a very clear two-part litmus test for exactly this situation.
And we find this divine standard in the book of Deuteronomy. Now, it's really important to get this. This isn't about how you feel about someone or their charisma. This is a hard and fast rule, an unbreakable test that's designed to be the ultimate measure of a prophet's authenticity.
The whole framework is a simple but really tough two-step process. First up, you've got the loyalty test, which we find in Deuteronomy 13. And second, there's the accuracy test from Deuteronomy 18. Here's the deal. A prophet has to pass both. No exceptions, no curveballs.
Okay, first let's look at the loyalty test. Picture this. A prophet comes along and does some incredible signs and wonders, things that are just undeniable. But then, that same prophet turns around and says, "Hey, let's go worship other gods." The Bible is crystal clear here. Do not listen. Their message, no matter how amazing the miracles are, can never ever contradict the core commandment to worship the God of Israel and Him alone.
The second part is the accuracy test, and honestly, it's brutally straightforward. If a prophet makes a prediction in the name of the Lord and that thing does not happen, well, the Bible says the Lord didn't speak it. That's it. The standard is 100% accuracy. It's a simple pass or fail.
All right, so now that we have this clear two-part test from the Scriptures, let's apply it to maybe the most pivotal figure in all of history, Yeshua of Nazareth. How does his ministry actually stack up against this very specific biblical standard?
You know, when you look at the gospel accounts, a really clear pattern emerges. Let's start with the loyalty test. Yeshua flat out says he came to fulfill the Torah, not get rid of it. And he's always pointing people back to the Father, never to other gods. So check. Now, what about the accuracy test? Well, when he's asked for his credentials, he just points to the results. The blind see, the lame walk, the dead are raised. The signs he talked about were happening. So according to the text, he passes both tests, period.
And this raises a massive, glaring contradiction, doesn't it? If Yeshua so clearly passed the Bible's own test for a prophet, why in the world was he condemned by the religious leaders of his day? The answer is as simple as it is profound. They weren't using the biblical test, they were using their own.
See, instead of holding him up against Deuteronomy's divine standard, the religious leaders, especially the sect of the Pharisees, were judging Yeshua against a totally different set of laws, an entire elaborate system of rules that they themselves had created.
And the conflict really centered on this illegitimate set of rules. The Hebrew term for them is takanot. And, as the Encyclopedia Judaica puts it, these were not just some harmless traditions, oh no. These were man-made laws that were believed to have the authority to actually change or even cancel out the written law of God.
And the Gospels actually record Yeshua deliberately and very publicly violating these takanot. I mean, look at these examples. He healed on the Sabbath, which they had decided was forbidden work. He and his disciples would pluck grain or skip the ceremonial hand washing. And let's be super clear, none of this stuff is forbidden in the Torah itself, but they were all huge violations of the Pharisees' extra man-made rules.
The contrast here is just staggering. Yeshua himself points out that according to God's own law, the priests work in the temple on the Sabbath and are considered blameless. But under the man-made rule of the takanot, healing someone on the Sabbath gets twisted into a crime worthy of death, an act they literally sought to kill him for.
And Yeshua didn't dance around this issue. He confronted it head-on. He directly accused the religious leaders of breaking the actual commandments of God just so they could keep their own rules, which he specifically calls takanots. He was exposing their entire system for what it was. So this all builds up to a final verdict. The conflict wasn't just some small disagreement over rules. It was a fundamental clash between two totally opposing legal systems, God's eternal law versus man-made religion. This table really just lays it all out, doesn't it? Look at the source. God's law from Mount Sinai versus rules from rabbinic rulings. What about authority? One is eternal and unchangeable, while the other claims it can change the eternal. And Yeshua's stance? He upheld one and deliberately violated the other. And this is the real kicker. The divine prophet test, the one laid out in God's law, was completely ignored by the leaders in favor of their own system.
So here's the crucial takeaway.
the thing you have to get. The condemnation of Yeshua wasn't because he failed the biblical test. The religious leaders never even used that test on him. He was condemned for one reason, for breaking their man-made rules, and in doing that, for challenging their entire system of authority.
And this brings us to Yeshua's own chilling definition of lawlessness. In his famous Sermon on the Mount, he warns that on Judgment Day he's going to turn away people who work iniquity. Now, that Greek word there is anomia. A means without, nomos means law. He's literally saying, "Depart from me, you who are without the Torah." The ultimate crime is to operate outside of God's law because you prefer your own.
You know, this historical showdown isn't just some story from the past. It leaves us with a question that is just as sharp and just as relevant today. The whole conflict was about judging someone by man-made rules instead of God's revealed law. And that forces us to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, which set of rules are we following today?